Well, I think today brought up a huge number. I mean, it did exactly what we wanted it to, didn't it, Emma? It brought up a huge number of questions and clarifications. And this next 30 minutes, we want to hear what I think Mark, you did a great job in summing up everything. Thank you for that. But we want to just take this opportunity now to dig a bit deeper. And I think one of the first things that came up, which we could maybe start the conversation on, is around the topic of new identity. I mean, that came up with most probably all of you to a certain extent, that the church is having a reawakening, an aha moment, and then even asking the question, what is church and how can we be church at this time? Of course, locality is the key way of doing that, but I'm also very much aware that our context of our discussion today is how can we also be involved globally, or what does that mean for global mission and the global church impact? So over to you. I wonder if maybe we could just focus on that first question, and then we can let the questions flow as people have the priorities coming to their hearts and minds, and I'll prompt if necessary. But let's just talk about this identity, this reawakening of church locally and then globally. And perhaps Finmi, because you brought it up, we just ask you to just expand a little bit on the Nigerian context, because you've got the mega church issue as well that you're facing there, and what does that mean? So we'll just start off with Finmi, and then we'll just be open discussion.
Okay, yes. So thank you very much. Welcome back from the break, everybody. I like to look at it at two levels, if I may. In talking about global reaction, there are different levels. First and foremost, within our nations, Africa, for example, in Africa, we are looking at a situation where we collaborate better across nations. For example, in South Africa, where the pandemic kind of got up to a kickstart before other countries. There was the issue of trying to reach out to Nigerian communities across borders. So we're looking at cross-border relationships, building cross-border partnerships, and trying as much as possible to help governments understand our communities better and looking at the needs of our communities within those countries. And that turned up a whole lot of issues in terms of the distance between countries, even within the church setting. So we're looking more deeply into issues of partnership with governments to help both our communities over there and their communities here. So it's kind of increasing, I will say, intergovernmental interaction, but also inter-church collaborations across borders. So I think I'm simply talking about cross-border partnerships for the benefit of citizens. So we're looking at citizen diplomacy, becoming more interested in the well-being of our citizens in different countries. So that's the first level. The second level that has kind of gotten off to a huge start in Nigeria is the women's movement. We are looking at a situation whereby women need to stop working in silos, probably within their church formations or within their local communities. And as a church, we discover that women do not have a strong voice at the level of governance, both in church and in society. So we're beginning to talk to each other and saying that the COVID-19 is opening up for us a platform, an opportunity, an excuse, if you may say, to come together as women and begin to work concertedly, have one voice, and stand up and stand out, speak out on issues that are very, very important to us. One of the issues that we've been speaking about is the fact that when the government set up a COVID-19 response team at the federal level, only one woman was placed on that committee of 12. And we noticed right from the beginning that the response was highly gender insensitive. And so that's one area that we began to draw the attention of government that no, women need a voice on these platforms, because women are the people who will articulate and actually implement a lot of these policies of government. And I think that also it applies in the church. Finally, just last week, I was involved in an initiative with the Institute for National Transformation. It is a national, but also a global platform because it has partners in the US, in the UK, and other countries. There has been radical generosity in giving to the poorest of the poor. And some of these people are Muslims. So we've used that platform to engage in cross-cultural mission by providing food packages, hygiene packages to people who need them in communities. So that's thinking globally, I would say, getting international partnerships, but acting at the local level, and at the same time reaching out cross-culturally to communities that are not necessarily within the church.
Thanks, Femi. Well, your response has been very much that it's happening through a citizenship-led or Nigerian-led, even with the diaspora. What role would you would people like Tier Fund or members of Global Connections or international church movements or Asia, how would they be able to help or support you? Or is this a time where you're going to focus mainly on national movements?
Thank you very much for that question. So like the initiative I just mentioned, there was an international organization involved. And what I would suggest is identify local actors who are close to the people, who are not necessarily big names, but they are working and they do have a mission and they are sincere. One struggle that we've had in Nigeria is that a lot of money has been lost through partnering with corrupt initiatives that front themselves as Christian initiatives, but are not. And there's been a lot of disillusionment from international partners because sometimes they send money, they send relief, and it doesn't get to where it's supposed to get to. So there is a need to identify sincere, locally grounded groups that are actually doing the work. They may not necessarily be well known, but they're getting the job done.
Cheryl, could I jump in?
Please do.
Thank you so much, Funmi, for talking like that. I mean, Viva at its core is an organization that works at grassroots. It collaborates with 5,000 different churches around the globe, utilizing 10,000 volunteers to do the work that we do when it comes to protecting children from abuse and violence. And obviously now, in the COVID reality, pivoting into this relief space. I think for me, the thing that we really need to look at is how we engage the church to be much more grassroots motivated. So it's not necessarily always just a cerebral understanding that we have of the gospel, albeit that's wonderful, but it's about how we engage local actors, as you said, who are passionate about their communities and want to see their communities affected and changed. And that's what Viva exists for. We try and really make a significant difference on a societal level through preventative work. And now we're looking at how we can change society and increase the role of the church through doing relief work that allows us into even more development space with local government, with national government, and with other organizations. And one of the major ways that we've tried to pivot very quickly is we've got all of these volunteers that work for us, and they're very passionate about their own communities. How can we equip them to do a wonderful job in the current reality that they're facing? And we're seeing the same figures as you, 35–40% raise in abuse of children during lockdown in Myanmar, in Cambodia, in Nepal. And I don't know how Nepal can actually increase by 40% because it's already that high. And you know, you're looking at these things and you're like, okay, this is crazy, what can we do? So we actually are piloting now a 6-week telephone program where we're utilizing each of these 10,000 volunteers to call 10 different families, talk with a parent in a household and a child in a household, and actually address some of the issues, provide them with some meaningful conversation around around different issues, whether it's hygiene related, whether it's how to deal with anger management and stress when you're in this crazy lockdown situation. And for me, I think we really need to focus in on how we can, as the church worldwide, equip grassroots to do much more effective work in that space. So I'm really encouraged to hear what you're talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And I think what you've brought is quite a good question, is in what role can networks play? Because there's this grassroots local reality that we're doing, but there's also a number of networks that are represented here. So there's, of course, Viva, there's Global Connections, there's EFI, and in what way can networks actually help, or is the time of networks over? Is it time to shift gears? Let's ask that question of our networks online now at the moment.
My view, if I may, is the age of networks is beginning rather than coming to an end. But I think the way that we do it has to start changing. And I think there are probably three ways that where that change is necessary. One, I think the leadership of networks, so here I'm talking primarily of people like myself who actually run the networks, have to develop a much deeper servant approach to our members. We need to be listening to them and serving them with a more intentional approach, so that we're not the center of the web. And the temptation, I think, is often to become the center of the web. And I think that was one of your successes with Micah, Cheryl, that's the approach you took. But I think there's also a need to equip our members to identify the local agents that Funmi was just talking about. Instead of assuming we can do it or assuming that we as an organization can do it, it's now identify those who we can empower to do it. And that's quite a significant shift for a lot of mission agencies. So this process of indigenization that's been going on, I think COVID is accelerating it. And we need to ride that wave. And that will have quite a significant change for the business models and funding models that we in the West have assumed will continue forever and ever, amen. They won't, and I suspect they'll start folding very quickly unless we can now change its empowerment of the local, and we need to learn a few new skills to do that. So Age of Networks is just beginning. We need to do it differently and more gracefully.
Thanks, John. Mark?
I agree that the age of networks is just beginning, but I think we actually need to go further than that. I think networks need to become movements, and that's what's going to bring about the changes that we're thinking about. Grassroots movements that cross these boundaries, these national boundaries that Fumi was talking about, and I think in our more interconnected world that we've experienced in this COVID time, we've seen the potential of that. But I think it needs to be movements that we're after, and that is, again, requires a different leadership style, as John has said. It also requires a different governance model as well. But I think that's where our thinking needs to go.
Thanks. And Ashima, maybe you're National Director of a network and to a certain extent a movement of EFI in India. What would your comments be on this?
My comments on this is that one thing I would like to say first is that in India, there's a lack of freedom of religion. We're not, and freedom of speech and freedom of lack of through media. We're not able to get the right numbers of patients who have been suffering with COVID-19, or we're not able to get the right statistics of the number of domestic abuse that we are facing. So it is state by state, and it is enormous, and it is different in every state context. What I want to say is first is that You know, there was a mention, and while we were talking about the access of net, you know, and the access of net out here in India, in the grassroots levels, with the women or with the children also at some point of time is not possible. You know, the helpline numbers are there, but the women are not, you know, capable. You know, we anyways lack freedom, and at these COVID times and the lockdown times, we hardly have any freedom, and women are curbed and locked in one room, and they can't call or use any kind of medium where they are being facing violence or abuse. Now, the other thing also that I would like to share at this point of time is that what is the way we can move forward when we are talking about local churches. Just before this meeting, I was in a conversation. We formed a network called PUSH, People Uniting to Stop Human Trafficking. I'm deeply engaged as far as human trafficking issues are concerned. And we were having a talk with the local churches at the grassroots level. And I did mention about the reverse migration that we are seeing. What about those people? How the church can reach out to people over there? Now, a very interesting fact that I would like to share with you, that the people at the grassroots level, the community at large, are not aware of what COVID-19 is also. They're not aware of coronavirus. What is coronavirus? For them, because majority of rural part of India has not been touched, but now because of the migration and the migrant workers going there and reverse migration, there are some cases. For them, it is like this is a illness which is spreading by touching. That's their understanding of, so how we have the one very interesting case study that I would like to share at this point of time, if I have time. Can I go ahead, Cheryl?
We don't have that much time. If you can summarize it in a minute, that would be great.
Yeah, so that how the local churches fought along with the women group and just developed masks, face masks for these, for the people in the community. You know, those type of action, or like how these self-help groups, the women self-help groups that we have at the grassroots level, collaborated with the district administration, and their food items that they had, they were giving it as a relief. You know, so these little church-based action and church integral mission actions that were seen on ground were very, very encouraging. But the challenge is in India, which is enormously populated with 1.3 billion, is that how the church is going out to reach without the internet also. Because in many parts of India, we do not have the online or the net facilities.
No, thanks, Ashima. And so that how question becomes an issue. But the challenge as well is about networks becoming movements. And I think, Amanda, you've had significant experience on both networking, and now you're running the network for the Women's Commission in WA, but also of a movement to bring about change, which is also what's been brought up as an information need in India is coming very apparent, as well as what can we do to improve things. How would you respond to this challenge of networking, movement, information from your perspective, Amanda?
I think lots of the comments throughout this session are, you know, really exciting and lovely, and lots of us have been talking about them for a while, and we just hope that it gets through to perhaps some of the more conservative or more fearful aspects of the church community, because sometimes we can be fearful, can't we? And it's not just me saying that about other people, but we can be fearful of change, and we can be fearful of listening to other voices, because it means letting go of control. And John hinted at that, and several people, and Mark as well, and Matt. All of us realize that the early church was a chaotic and wonderfully democratic thing, and we need to revive that so that we're incredibly local, as Heidi was talking about, and all of us were talking about, and also we need that networking so that the incredibly local can get good information and good knowledge and good equipping. Because if we're just incredibly local, then we lose an awful lot of the benefits of being a global church. So it's both together, but how you do that in a way that's listening genuinely to the voices of the global church is always going to be an issue. It's not something that we're going to solve overnight, but my goodness, we need to be very, very conscious of it. Can I just tell you one story? I was talking to a woman who is trying to see her mission organization, which is very established and very large, start to include women more and also local voices more in its governance. And I think governance is a really key thing, getting diverse voices at the table and being listened to, and not just invited so that we can tick that box, but to genuinely listen to those voices is really important.
Thanks. And Heidi, you see that networks are seeing that they have a new change that they have to bring on how they serve and what's been suggested. But what about aid organizations? Is this a paradigm shift, this COVID-19? Is it revealing that things need to change? And if so, what would be the priorities?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I just got a couple of notes here, just reminding us of the importance of envisioning. If we're thinking about grassroots, how do we envision well? And you asked the question around local versus national. And I think it's both and. As we've worked with denominations over the years, we've had to work at both, as Mike has as well, had to work at both a national and a local level. In terms of pivoting, I guess the question we're asking ourselves now is, how do we continue to equip the local church to do its work within its local community? And we've been starting to think about, how do we create online communities of practice? How do we create those cross-denominational spaces? And already we've been hosting a couple of forums for theological colleges across Africa. And we've been seeing some really good results towards, again, a move towards, should we call it transformational integral mission. And it's been really exciting to see how cross-denominational, you know the word, denominational conversations are happening and picking up speed and momentum, and saying, and the need for, as I said earlier, challenging some of the theology that's out there, and creating theology that is good and embedded in whole life transformation and a response. And I think one of the things that I'll leave it here, is that once a church is awakened and has its identity rooted in a transformational theology, it has the ability to adapt and respond to all the varying thematic needs and supports that I've been hearing about, whether that's gender-based violence or trafficking. And I'm hearing stories across the board around how we're beginning to think, how churches are being able to quickly respond to the new issues that are coming into their communities because they've been awakened, where churches haven't necessarily been awakened or haven't been envisioned in the space of integral mission. I think that's our challenge, is how do we do that now in this new space where we're not able to gather in the same way, but certainly as the theological spaces are picking up the conversation. TFN has seen a massive increase of downloads from our theological resources page, which is really exciting to see, just local pastors picking up translated biblical studies that are helping to awaken small little community settings, whether that's your family or your little cell group or whatever that might be. So envisioning and equipping the church to be mobilized, I would say, are the kind of two areas that we need to, I think, really consider. How do we do that well in this next season?
Mark Collington, did you want to comment about that? Because that's a big part of your job.
Yes, thank you. I think what we're seeing, picking up on what Heidi's just said and on what Funmi said, is that the church, I think, is possibly gaining confidence in occupying public space at a very local level, and potentially also at national and transnational level. So I think sometimes we've been locked in our churches, busy praying, and what this virus has done is it's kicked us out of our church buildings, into communities, into homes, into helping to volunteer. And all of a sudden, I wonder if God's people have been set free from all the rotas that they were involved in, being busy and putting on Sunday mornings. And so there's possibly a new sense of working out, how do we engage in the welfare of our local communities, in people who aren't necessarily our church members. And this is the beginning, perhaps, of a movement that Mark is calling for, where we see the church as an organism and not as an organization. You know, there's nobody at the top who's going to sort of tell us all what to do, but this is happening across all churches. So how do we engage in our local communities and meet some of those needs, whether it's particularly around gender-based violence or whether it's particularly around mental health issues through isolation? I wonder how much local leaders just need to keep the church in public space rather than when we're allowed to go back to worship, just getting caught up again in what we used to be doing.
I think that's a very, very big challenge. And perhaps in our last 5 or so minutes that we have, maybe we just draw to one of the big issues that was raised, I think by Mark as well as others. And that is the economy and working in impoverished communities, climate change linked with that. We saw that on the Tier Fund video. I mean, it seems enormous to be able to try and help reboot. Or if we do we want to reboot in such a good way? What are the good values of rebooting, and how do we also help small industry and people through this crisis? Does anybody have a solution that they've come across on how we can do that in our communities? Any thoughts on that? Open to the group.
Shima has.
No, I don't have the right answer, but just a few things that we've started to do along with the churches in the local communities is that we've started to, as we're saying, equipping and engaging them on having livelihood. So we're seeing reverse migration, and we've seen people coming back into their communities. So we're engaging with the local churches to reach out to these people and have some livelihood options with them, and develop small SG groups so that at that local level they can help in producing masks, face masks, or hand sanitizers, or just simple soaps, so that they can give it to the community at large. So these are small initiatives, I will say, and I'll not say that we've started, but these are small initiatives that we have already started to work on and move forward with the local churches and equipping them on such things.
Thanks, Ashima.
Can I say something?
Yeah. For me? You're muted.
To pick up from where Ashima left off, the Nigerian church and individuals within the church are realizing that this is a time to reprioritize, particularly in terms of budgeting. We're beginning to see that we were spending money on a lot of things that weren't really essentially important. The things that really did look like they were important, church buildings and many things like that. And we're beginning to discover that, no, we need to focus on building people. We need to focus on issues like livelihood. And we need to focus on developing local capacity in terms of technologies. So one of the things that a lot of people in Nigeria are talking about right now, both in the church and in the wider society, is the need to get the young people. Africa has so many young people. Challenge the young people, empower the young people, create a conducive environment for young people to develop their technical skills so that they can start building indigenous technologies. And that is a critical service and a critical need in Africa in particular. The other thing is even personal spending. Nigerians spend big on weddings, funerals, birthdays. And COVID-19 has shown us that no more spending on non-essentials. So we're learning to refocus how we even spend our own personal money, and we're learning to have simple weddings, fewer people. I guess we're becoming more British, let's say, and less Nigerian. But it's been very, very useful, and people are very happy with the new norm in that respect. And it's opening up ideas about how we can go online for networking businesses, get into agriculture, and use the church money to do what the church really would need to do to advance the kingdom, which is investing in people.
Yeah, I think from an economic perspective, I think that there's a lot of struggles that are going to ensue. My undergraduate was in economics, so I think economics in general, or the way that our world is set up to to essentially encourage greed. And I think that the response that the church has to have as we look to reset our economies is one where greed is not the motivating factor, but a collective sense or desire to see everybody do well needs to be something that at least we push for in the church, that we're saying we don't want the same old thing to be given back to us. I think one of the things that I reflected on was what Mark Galpin talked about. He said that we're called to be different. And my feel is that we actually need to demonstrate sacrifice on a level that hasn't been seen by any other group before for us to be taken seriously. So that sacrifice from a financial perspective, that sacrifice from a time perspective, that sacrifice from, you know, from giving up of our own desires so that others can be helped and seen. And I think that the greatest challenge that we're going to have is how do we sacrifice in a way that demonstrates God's love effectively, and the motivation behind us doing what we're doing is never then going to be challenged as being self-fulfilling, like I'm doing this because I want the plaudits, but it will be allowing us that opportunity to really sow into other people's lives much more effectively. And I think what COVID has done, unfortunately, is it's actually brought us into a place where we start thinking about ourselves much more than we need to be, and we need to actually start thinking about others much more effectively than just constantly going, oh, look at the bad situation that I'm in, look at all of the sacrifices that I'm making for myself. We should be thinking, how can I sacrifice for others instead?
Thanks very much, Matt. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so we're going to have to end there. Just a short lesson from myself is that, you know, we've had this clap every Thursday at 8 for the NHS, which is in a way drawing to an end now. But what it's done is that it's shown me that the need for community celebration and community lamentation is needed. And we're thinking that we might need, even for a time of all these funerals that are not having full funeral support, we will have to have a community grieving time as well, recognition of lives lost, stresses lived through. But at the same time, there's a fringe group in every community that people, the unexpected people, are showing their gifts. And I'm seeing more and more a move to be a person who fans into flame ideas that are coming from the most unexpected places, not always the church, and that God is raising up people to see. And I think Amanda's just put that quote from Justin Welby there, resurrection of our common life. I think that's a very key learning point, that there is this resurrection of this common life where we are helping and serving one another, where the church plays a catalyzing, celebratory, capacity building, initiative and stimulating, and as Heidi said, a creative imagination coming into this, which sums up this movement of change and transformation that we're hoping to see in the public square, can no longer be under lock and key of the church building. Indeed, we saw even in India, Kennedy Dunbarlin was sharing how churches were opening up for these migrant workers to have accommodation, buildings being used for other purposes as a sign of service. So that's, I think, very encouraging. And I want to thank you all. And I'm going to invite Emma now, just to maybe give us some final thoughts as we wrap up this session. Emma.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. That was a great summary anyway. The only things that I would like to just raise that have remained in the shadows is a very stunning phrase that one of you said, that there can be still other pandemics growing in the shadows, and that was a reference to gender-based violence. But I think we need to keep our eyes open as God's people. The other pandemics that are emerging other than gender-based violence are issues with food insecurity leading to famine. And I think when you have rightfully that call to generosity, that call to demonstrate sacrifice, to think of the others, I am praying and hoping that we are not merely going to close our doors and take care of self when we start counting our pennies and the effect that it's had on our pockets, on our global pocket and on our nation's pocket,
but actually continue to keep the doors open, so that actually there is never a place again when the church cannot be a part of the marketplace, where people naturally turn to the church and said, you do this because we know you're Jesus. And that's my prayer for us as we move forwards into the third webinar and really reflect biblically, theologically, and bringing more prophetic edge to what you've already brought today and last week. So thank you.